I was 8 when the dream started, and even now I hesitate to call them nightmares, because nightmares are supposed to end when you wake up. These didn't. They lingered in a way that made it feel like waking up didn't actually save me, like something had followed me out of sleep and into the rest of my life. I'd sit at the breakfast table in the morning, staring into a bowl of cereal I had no intention of finishing, and feel it just behind me, not moving, not breathing, but present in a way that pressed against my awareness. I couldn't ignore it even if I wanted to. It never made a sound, never reached out, never did anything I could point to and explain. It just watched. At night, it stood in the corner of my room. The first time I saw it, I told myself it was nothing more than a shadow, something harmless shaped by low light and an overactive imagination. It could have been a coat or a chair or anything my mind decided to misunderstand in the dark. But shadows don't shift when you're not looking, and they don't return night after night with subtle changes that become obvious when you stop trying to explain them away. This thing changed. The second night, it stayed in the far corner, barely distinguishable from the darkness around it. The third night, it moved just enough to separate itself from the wall, like it wanted me to notice the difference. By the fourth night, I was able to make out details, though details isn't quite the right word. It didn't have features so much as the suggestion of them, as if something tried to recreate the idea of a human shape from memory and gotten it slightly wrong. I stopped sleeping after that, or at least I tried to. I'd lie in bed with my eyes open, staring at the ceiling until they burned and watered, convincing myself that as long as I didn't close them, it couldn't get any closer. But exhaustion always won, and when I finally fell asleep, it grabbed me by my ankles. My grandmother noticed before anyone else did. She had a way of noticing things people weren't supposed to see, as though she lived just slightly outside of the version of the world everyone else accepted. She stayed with us back then, in a room at the end of the hall that smelled faintly of dried herbs and something bitter I could never quite name. One night, she found me sitting on the floor beside my bed, my back pressed tightly against it, and my eyes fixed on the corner, like if I looked away, something terrible would happen. She didn't ask me what I was staring at. Instead, she followed my gaze, studying the same corner I was watching for nights on end, and then she nodded, as if something had been confirmed. Ah, she spoke in a whisper. You've reached that stage. She didn't sound afraid or surprised. She sounded like this was something expected. I asked her what it was, and for a moment she didn't answer. She just rested her hand against the back of my neck, her touch warm in a way that made me want to believe everything would be all right. You don't get rid of these things, Marin, she said. You just give them somewhere else to go. That night she showed me the cure, and what struck me even then was how simple it was. There was no elaborate ritual, no symbols drawn on the floor, nothing that looked powerful enough to banish what had been following me. She placed a small bowl of water beneath my bed, and then she crushed dried leaves between her fingers, releasing a sharp, earthy scent that filled the room as the fragments drifted into the water. Before you sleep, she told me, you have to name it. I asked her what that meant, and she shook her head gently. Not its name, she said. Yours for it. She told me to describe it out loud, every detail I could remember, what it looked like, where it stood, how it moved, and most importantly, how it made me feel. My voice trembled when I began, because at 8 years old, I understood that speaking about it while it stood there meant acknowledging it, and acknowledging it meant it could hear me. Still, I forced myself to continue. I described the way it leaned slightly, and the way its arms hung too long at its sides, not following the proportions of anything human. I spoke about the absence where its face should have been, and how I could feel it looking at me anyway. I told it everything I had been too afraid to say before, every detail I had tried to ignore, every fear I had wrapped around it just to make sense of what I was seeing. When I finished, my grandmother's voice came softly from beside me. "Now give it away." I didn't understand what she meant, but she told me to repeat the last part, not to her, but to the room itself. So I whispered into the quiet, "You can go somewhere else now." The moment the words left my mouth, something shifted. There was no sound, no visible movement, nothing that could be easily explained, and yet the entire room felt different. The corner where it had stood felt empty. That night, I slept comfortably without the sense of being watched. And after that, it was gone. A few days later, I asked my grandmother what it had been, where it had gone, and why it had stopped. But she didn't look at me when she answered. "It's not your concern anymore," she replied. Again, I asked her to tell me, and she shook her head. "You don't need to hear it twice." At the time, I didn't understand what she meant. Years passed and I grew up, moved away, and built a life that had nothing to do with bowls of water beneath beds or whispered remedies in dark rooms. For the most part, I stopped thinking about it, though every now and then it'd surface in my mind late at night, when the room felt just a little too still and the silence seemed to press in a little too closely. But it never came back. Not until last week. I was standing in the hallway outside my apartment when I heard crying. It was soft at first, then it grew louder, carrying that particular kind of fear that only children seem to reach when they don't have the words to explain what's wrong. The new tenants, a young couple with a little girl, next door moved in a few days. I hesitated before knocking, unsure whether I should involve myself at all, but something about the sound pulled me forward anyway. When the door opened, the woman standing there looked exhausted. I started to apologize, to explain that I had heard something and wanted to make sure everything was all right, but she interrupted me with a strained smile. "She's just having trouble sleeping," she said. Of course she was. I don't know why I asked what I asked next, but the words came out before I could stop them. "What kind of trouble?" The woman hesitated, then stepped aside and opened the door a little wider. Her daughter sat curled on the couch, her knees pulled tightly to her chest, her eyes fixed on something that wasn't there. I felt it before she spoke, the same suffocating awareness, the same sense of being watched from just outside my line of sight. The girl didn't look at me when she spoke. Her voice was quiet, almost distant. "It stands in the corner." Her mother laughed nervously, brushing it off as something childish, something harmless. But I stepped forward anyway, unable to stop myself. "Where in the corner?" I asked. The girl lifted her hand and pointed not behind her, but behind me. My body refused to turn around, as if it already knew what I would see. "Does it move?" I asked. She nodded. "It gets closer every night." Then she added, almost as if she were mentioning something small and unimportant, "It knows things." "About you?" I asked. She shook her head. "About someone else." "It said your name." I don't know how long I stood there before I went back to my apartment and returned with herbs. I headed to their kitchen to fill a bowl with water. I returned to the girl before adding them to the bowl. And as I stood there, I remembered what my grandmother told me. The cure doesn't destroy anything, it just passes it on. I also understood why she never said its name twice, because once is enough. And I think it's starting to remember me again.